the day the cross fell. The town of San Aurelio had always looked as if it had stepped straight out of a painting. Cobbled streets winding between whitewashed houses, flower boxes spilling over with geraniums, and at its heart, the stone church of St. Michael the Archangel. Its bell tower rose above the rooftops, crowned with a wrought iron cross that had stood for over 2 centuries. On a gray afternoon in November 1943, the peace that had once filled those streets was long gone. War had come to the region months earlier, and San Aurelio found itself under occupation. Soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms patrolled the square, their boots clattering like a metronome of fear. Curfews, rationing, and sudden searches had become the new normal. That day, a squad of soldiers marched into the square under the command of Sergeant Karl Voss. He was a tall man in his late 20s, with sharp cheekbones, a jaw perpetually set like stone, and eyes that never seemed to rest on anyone for more than a second. His uniform was immaculate, his heart anything but. Voss stopped at the foot of the church steps and stared up at the cross. "Bring it down," he said to his men, his voice flat but carrying enough weight to silence the square. The townspeople who had been lingering nearby froze. Father Matteo, the parish priest, stepped forward, his black cassock brushing the stone as he descended the steps. "Sergeant," he began, "that cross has stood through famine, plague, and war. It harms no one." Voss didn't even look at him. "Orders," he replied curtly. "We remove religious symbols that could inspire resistance. That's what command wants." The priest swallowed, trying to remain calm. "It is not a weapon. It is a reminder of hope." "Exactly," Voss said, signaling his men. The soldiers brought ropes, hooked them to the iron, and began to pull. The metal groaned in protest. Some of the women gasped. A few crossed themselves. Father Matteo bowed his head in prayer. With a final creak, the cross toppled, crashing onto the cobblestones. A sickening clang echoed through the square. Voss didn't flinch. He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving the cross where it lay, bent and scarred. That night, the people of San Aurelio did not sleep well. The man behind the uniform, Karl Voss, had not always been like this. He was born in a small German village near the Rhine. His father had been a mill worker, his mother a seamstress. They were not wealthy, but they were people of faith. Karl had once been an altar boy in his parish, carrying candles up the aisle with a shy smile. But the war had changed everything. His father was killed in the first year of the conflict. His mother died during a bombing raid soon after. At 20, Karl had nothing left but the uniform the army gave him and the orders they drilled into his head. He had seen things on the front that no man should see. Friends cut down beside him, villages burning, children crying over the bodies of their parents. Somewhere along the line, his faith, his compassion, and his hope had been buried under the rubble. By the time he was assigned to occupation duty in Italy, he had learned one thing. If you wanted to survive, you had to harden yourself against everything. And so, when he tore down that cross, it was not because he hated religion. It was because he couldn't stand the sight of something that reminded him of what he had lost. Whispers in the town. In the days that followed, the bent cross remained where it had fallen. The soldiers ignored it. The townspeople avoided it, afraid of provoking more trouble. But they whispered about the act, about the man who had ordered it. Father Matteo moved quietly among his flock, tending to the sick, sharing out what little bread he had, and praying before the empty space above the church. A cross is more than metal, he told them. It is the truth it represents, and truth cannot be torn down. One afternoon, a little girl named Sophia, no more than 8, was playing in the square when she wandered over to the fallen cross. She ran her small fingers over the cold metal, then looked up at her mother. "Why is Jesus on the ground?" Her mother knelt beside her. "Because some people forget who he is," she whispered. "But he will rise again." What neither of them noticed was Karl Voss watching from across the square. For some reason he could not explain, the child's words lodged in his mind like a splinter. The first crack. A week later, Voss was ordered to lead a patrol into the hills to root out suspected resistance fighters. It was cold, the air thin and sharp, and the narrow paths twisted like snakes. Halfway up, they came across a small farmhouse. Inside, they found nothing but an elderly couple and a sick boy coughing under a blanket. "Search it," Voss ordered. His men turned the place upside down, finding nothing. As they were about to leave, the old woman took Voss's hand suddenly and pressed something into it. A tiny wooden crucifix, worn smooth by years of touch. "For protection," she said in halting German. "For your soul." He almost laughed, almost tossed it back, but instead he slipped it into his pocket. He told himself it was to avoid offending her. But later that night, alone in his quarters, he found himself staring at it. It reminded him of the cross he had torn down. And for the first time in months, he felt unsettled. The ambush. Not long after, Voss's patrol was caught in an ambush. Gunfire erupted from the hills, bullets snapping through the air. One of his men went down instantly. Voss dove behind a wall, returning fire, the crucifix in his pocket pressing against his thigh with every movement. A grenade landed near him. He had seconds. Instinctively, he threw himself over the nearest soldier, shielding him from the blast. The explosion rocked the ground, but somehow, impossibly, they were both still alive. Shaken, ears ringing, Voss reached into his pocket. The wooden crucifix had splintered in two. Conversations with the priest. In the days after the ambush, Voss found himself avoiding the square, avoiding the sight of the fallen cross. But one evening, unable to explain even to himself why, he walked into the church. Father Matteo was there, kneeling before the altar. He did not look surprised to see Voss. "You're welcome here," the priest said simply. Voss hesitated. "I don't believe anymore." "That's all right," Matteo replied. "God believes in you." They talked for hours. About the war, about loss, about the things Voss had seen and done. The priest did not excuse any of it, but neither did he condemn him. "You cannot undo the past," Matteo said, "but you can decide what kind of man you will be tomorrow." The illness. Winter came early that year. Supplies grew scarce. And then an outbreak of typhus swept through the town. Soldiers and civilians alike fell ill. When Sophia, the little girl from the square, was struck down by the fever, her mother came to the church, begging for help. The doctor had no medicine left. The only thing to do was pray. Voss heard about it from one of his men. He surprised even himself by going to see her. She lay pale and still, her small chest rising shallowly. On the table beside her bed was a small silver medal of Saint Michael. He sat there for a long time, listening to her labored breathing. When her mother left to fetch water, He knelt beside the bed. "If you're there," he whispered, "help her. Not me. Just her." The sign. The next morning, Sophia's fever broke. Her mother wept with joy. The doctor shook his head in disbelief. And Voss felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He went straight to the church. Father Matteo listened silently as Voss told him what had happened. "Do you think it was because I prayed?" Voss asked. The priest smiled. "When a soldier kneels before God, heaven takes notice." The decision. That night, Voss made a decision. The next morning, before the sun rose, he and two of his men carried the bent cross back to the church steps. The townspeople, roused by the noise, gathered in the square. Voss met Father Matteo's eyes. "If you'll have it back," he said. The priest nodded. Together, with the help of townsfolk and even a few soldiers, they hoisted the cross back into place. When it stood once more above the bell tower, the square erupted in applause. For the first time in years, Voss felt lighter. A changed man. The war did not end that day, but something in San Aurelio changed. Soldiers treated the townspeople with more respect. Tensions eased, and Voss became known not as the man who tore down the cross, but as the man who put it back. When the war finally ended, he stayed in Italy for a time, helping rebuild the town he had once helped occupy. He attended Mass every Sunday, and when Father Matteo died years later, it was Voss who carried the cross at the head of the funeral procession. Sometimes God's grace comes in the unlikeliest of moments, even in the heart of a soldier who thought he had no faith left. And when one life is changed, it can change a whole town forever. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel for more faith-filled stories that inspire hope and remind us that no one is beyond God's reach.